We've got to really put our heart and soul into it if we say yes and commit to it. So it's all about this commitment. So tonight we're going to be in the 22nd chapter of Genesis. And I love the story because not because we don't understand it, but can you imagine? This is the story of Abraham and Isaac. Can you imagine if someone said, "Hey, I'm just now a new Christian. I don't know anything about the Bible. I'm just feeling the presence of the Holy Spirit, and I'm wanting to really come on board with this whole Christianity thing. And could you just share a part of the Bible with me?" And then you look at them and you go, "Yeah, we're going to talk about Abraham and Isaac." And then you read the story to them. They're kind of like, "Wait, wait, wait, wait. This is what Christianity is about, is sacrificing your kids?" This is an Old Testament thing, but I want us to read this, and I want us to put ourselves in the place of Abraham, but not only in the place of Abraham, but the place of Isaac as well. And so we'll start out reading this, and it's chapter 22, the book of Genesis, and this is where the whole thing gets started. It said, "And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham." Now, it's important to note here that the word tempt could also be translated as test or proven, because that's what it means in Hebrew. And he said unto Abraham, and he said, "Behold, here I am." And he said, "Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, and go into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering up on one of the mountains which I will tell you of." Now, that's just verse 1 and 2. So, thinking about that, you're a faithful servant here of Isaac, of Abraham, who's a faithful servant of God. And God comes to you with this request. What's going to be the first thing that you're going to run across your mind? It'll be a one-word question. Why? Yeah, why? Why would you, a loving God, the Creator, want me to do this? Why? Now, what did Abraham say? We go down to verse 3, and it says that Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took two of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. Doesn't seem like Abraham's questioning at all, does it? Doesn't seem like he didn't say why or whatever. So you got to look at Abraham's faith and go and be mighty impressed. This is a big calling. But the other thing I want us to think is, he's getting ready to go. And said in verse 4, it says, "Then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide you here with his ass, and I will take the lad and we'll go yonder and worship." And so with all this going on, Abraham says, "Hey, you guys wait here. I'm going to go on and worship." So do you think he's telling them just to kind of keep the mood calm, that, hey, we're going to go on and worship? How do you think it would be if he said, "I'm going to go on and do as the Lord had commanded. I'm going to sacrifice my son"? He's probably keeping this on the down low, isn't he? So with all of this going on, what do you think's going through Abraham's mind, this faithful, obedient servant to God who's heard God's command? He's following up on it, obviously without question. But what do you think's going through his mind? Any thoughts? Surely not. Yeah. Hmm? So, right, right. What he's thinking is, from a faithful standpoint, is, if I'm just obedient, this will all work out. But let's think about this for a second. God already knows what he's going to do. And I would say he probably knows what Abraham's going to do. He's going to be obedient. God knows all this. So what's the reason for God even doing it? If he already knows the faith of Abraham and he knows what he's going to do, why do it? What's the fallible factor in here? Hmm. Right, but what? Right. Let me rephrase that. In this scenario, what's the weakest link? It's Abraham because he's a human. He has all these emotions, these doubts, but God is omnipotent. He knows all. But what is this proving? Who's getting something proven to them? Abraham is Brad. I am so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Abraham is being taught by God that it, that Abraham is it's human nature to doubt your faith. It's human nature to doubt yourself. This lesson is God already knows what's going on. He is doing something for Abraham. He's letting Abraham prove to himself that his faith is real and that he is serving an omnipotent God that he trusts. So the fallible part of this whole thing, or the weakest link, is the human factor, not the godly factor. So the test has already been laid out, and God knows what Abraham's going to do. He knows his faith is strong, but he knows it far more than Abraham knows it. You see what I'm saying? He's wanting to convince Abraham, you are what I already know you are, but I need you to know it. And so he goes without question. You have something, Brad? Now you got one in a row right, so don't mess it up. Hmm. He does. So the point of this scenario that we read out here in the Old Testament of Abraham and Isaac is when we're asked to do something. Comparatively, it's nothing nowhere near this. But do you think sometimes God calls upon us and tests us not to prove how strong we are, but to prove how much work we need to do on ourselves? Hmm. And we're going to get to that. You're jumping the gun there, Wayne. No, seriously. But Isaac's going to learn something here too. So it's a double-edged sword here, but it's beautiful the way it plays out. So we go to we'll start at verse 6. It said Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. Well, this is symbolic in a way of Christ and the wood cross that Christ carried. Do you think there's some inclination here of God maybe kind of giving a little precursor to something that's to come? Abraham didn't want to lay down his son and sacrifice him, but he was willing to. But God offered another sacrifice later in the story. Hmm. And there's a nickname for Isaac. Was the covenant son? I think something like that. The son of the covenant or something. There was a nickname for him, and he was an example of that. So, it said so, and then this one really gets good. So he laid it on upon his son Isaac, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife. This is pretty graphic. It's not long ago I was watching a one of the old TBN telecasts, and they were showing this group that was reenacting a burnt offering from biblical times, and they brought this goat out, this beautiful goat, and they stood it up by this pit, and this man just casually walks up with a machete and just cuts its head right off, and it just falls right to the ground, and that goat withers around a few times and then lays down. And to me, I don't see stuff like that very often, so it was kind of graphic for me, and it was a little bit disturbing because this innocent animal, a beautiful little goat, just cut its head off, and then they drained the blood, and they went through some symbolic moves, and then they placed it on the fire. And I thought, in biblical times, this was just a regular thing and not a big deal. There were kids around, and and every bit of it went to waste. Well, not to waste, but to reenact the sacrifice. So this is what was getting ready to happen with Isaac. And the thought of it, and especially for those of us who have kids or grandkids, the thought of it is pretty overwhelming. Do you think that how do you think we would handle that? If I don't think we get those kind of messages, we don't get them now because of the new covenant and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. But in biblical times, how would we handle that? You know, it's hard to get up and come to church sometimes with a clear mind and a willing attitude because of life. But this is a lot put on a guy to come and do this. Yeah, yeah. And faith goes hand in hand with obedience. If you're faithful, you will be obedient. If you lack one, you lack the other. So then, as Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father, and Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and he said, My father. Now, this is what I want us to pay attention. Isaac, as an unresisting burnt offering, is a striking symbolism of what's to come with Jesus Christ. And he says he's basically delighting to do God's will. So he says, Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and he said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And the son, and he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. So it's getting close to where he's going to do what he's commanded to do. And this is kind of a saddest story for me because when you look at it, Abraham's carrying all the weight of the whole situation. And Isaac is just this innocent child who's just walking along and doing what they've probably done many times before. So in verse 7, he said, And they came to the place which God had told him. And this would be a place on the mountain where eventually Solomon's temple is believed to be built. So when yeah. So no, yeah, uh, yeah. It was. I'm a little bit ahead of myself. So when Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb and a burnt offering. So they went both of them to either. So Isaac was to be a type of, his example of what it's going to be like for the Son of God provided by the Lord, who would redeem mankind by the giving of himself in sacrifice on the cross as Jesus. So as they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hands and took the knife to slay his son. So we don't see any resistance here. I mean, I would probably start to get some kind of an idea when we were getting ready to sacrifice something, and Abraham starts to tie me up and then lays me on the wood. But it's, well, sure. But if you think, what was more important to Isaac, to the life of his son or to be disobedient to God? Abraham's disobedience wasn't going to happen. He was going to be obedient to God through all things. So he stretched forth his hand and he took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not your hand upon the lad, that neither do you anything unto him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Why do you think the word fear is in there? Why didn't it say, I see now that you love me, or you obey me, or you trust me? But why fear? Why do you think it says, I see now that you fear me? Yeah. Right. It's like when I was, that was my next point. It's like when I was little, I feared my dad, but not in the way you fear a wild animal or something, but I had a respectful fear. He says, "For now, I know that you fear God." So, um, there's different translations for that, but God knew that he was fearful and that he would not withhold his son from God if God commanded him to take him. But do you think God knew that beforehand, that he was not going to, that he was going to do what he said? Sure, he did, but Abraham didn't. So Abraham realized at that point, said, "I truly fear not being obedient to God." It wasn't like he thought God was going to kill him or strike him down. It was the fear of not having the relationship and the obedience. And we should be fearful of that as well. And it's not we don't apply the fear in the typical way we do. Like if I said, you know, Gary's got this great big old bull in that field that tried to run me down, and I'm scared of him, I'm not going to go in there. That can be, I'm fearful of that bull that I don't have any relationship with or couldn't care anything about. But so it's a totally different kind of fear, not in the way that we harbor fear here on earth. So he says, "I know that you fear God." So then in verse 13, he said, "And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns." This is the doctrine of substitution, plainly laid out. The ram was offered up in sacrifice instead of his son, which was likewise Jesus was offered up in sacrifice instead of us. So it's kind of laying the groundwork for something far greater to come. So in 14, and Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, meaning the Lord will provide. And it is said that to this day in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. So what is the whole meaning of this story? The whole lesson, more so than anything else. There's three points. Um, be obedient, fear, but not in the fear that we know. Yeah. And then action. If we're obedient and we have this spiritual fear of, and what it's a fear of is not being harmed by God or having anything done to us by God. It's a fear, an absolute petrifying fear of being separated from him, not being in his good graces, not having him, and ultimately having him say, "I don't know you, depart from me." That's the worst things when you're standing there in heaven. But so it's the fear of losing your relationship with him. And Abraham did not want that. He didn't. He wanted to keep that relationship, even if it meant sacrificing his son in an act of obedience to the Heavenly Father. So the purpose of God here isn't just to test Abraham. What do you think this whole test did for Isaac? When there was a suitable sacrifice that came in, and then I'm sure Isaac, at this point, knew the whole story, and I'm sure Abraham told him everything that happened after that, and there was a suitable sacrifice to come. Hmm. Absolutely. So, do you think that this lesson, in a lot of ways, is a lesson for future fathers, future pastors, future Christians? Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why I love this story. It gets told in a way to where we're kind of removed from it in a way. We talk about this person doing this thing, testing his faith and everything, and I like when we look at this and we implant ourselves into it. We think about what it's like to be Abraham, or we think about what it's like to be Isaac. And in some situations, we put ourselves in God's place and say, which I never do, but we say, what is he wanting to teach Abraham here? What's he wanting to teach him? He already knows. So he's wanting Abraham to see what he already knows about Abraham, you know. Um, yeah. So Isaac's obedience is often overlooked by Isaac. It's easy for me to sit back just to know how committed Chris is or how knowledgeable Brother Wayne is. It's easy for me to know that and see that, or know how the wisdom of Brother Bert, and just to see it. But the ones who often see it the least are Wayne and Chris and Brother Bert. But everybody else from the outside looking in have a whole different wonderful perspective. And this is how God saw Abraham, much differently than Abraham saw himself. So he had to get Abraham to latch onto the fact that I do fear God and I am obedient and he does provide. But without a horrendous test like this, Abraham probably wouldn't be as assured as he is after this is all passed. So when he sees the ram, it just everything comes together. It all clicks. And so the beauty of the lesson is to be fearfully obedient. And when I come home from school when I was a kid, if the yard needed mowing, and we didn't have Herbies, we had trash cans, these round trash cans beside the house, and it was different. The garbage men would come in the afternoon, and they would pick them up and put them on their head. You ever seen garbage men do that? Walking down the street with a big 55-gallon rubber thing on their head. And I knew when I came home, I better have the garbage ready. And if the yard needs mowing, I better get mowing it and then get on my homework. And I didn't do that because I was a cleanliness and I loved a beautiful yard and I wanted to get my homework done and everything. I did it because I didn't want problems with my dad. I loved my dad. He loved me. There was never a crossword or anything as long as I was obedient. And it was my wish, my desire to have him look at me and go, hey, you did a good job on that yard. That meant more to me than if he'd given me $50. I took the $50, but it meant plenty to me if he just said, man, that yard looks really good. There's nobody can mow it as well as you do. That's what I wanted to hear from my earthly father. But we should also want accolades from our heavenly Father. And Abraham proved himself to be a worthy, deserving servant of all the good things that happened to him. So, and then we go into the next, we start with verse 15, we'll go into the covenant confirmed. And, but for tonight, we're 25 minutes. So just going to talk about this. So what do you all, when you read the story about Abraham and Isaac, it's a short story in the 22nd chapter here. What does it mean to you all? What do you get from it? I like your shirt. What does it mean to you all when you hear the story? Do you think of obedience, or do you think of fear, or do you think of God will provide, or could it be all of those things, a little bit of each thing? Yeah. Mm-hmm. We do. We go, but I don't think we go through the sacrifice of that magnitude. But we act like we do. I mean, we act like Jesus is asking us to sacrifice, or God's asking us to sacrifice our children every day just by being kind to each other. You know, it's not hard to be kind to each other. It's not hard to love each other unconditionally. And the ones that make it hard is ourselves, because we're putting so many parameters on all these good things we do when God doesn't. He doesn't. And he proved it here. He said, as long as you love me and you're obedient to me, I will provide. And you're going to have to go through some testing now. It's not going to be easy. And, we get tested from time to time. It's kind of like when you get married and you expect the marriage to be perfect. There'd never be an argument. There'd never be a crossword. There'd never be a misunderstanding or anything that goes on in a husband and wife relationship. If you're expecting that, then you're really going to be disappointed. And the same thing happens when you become a Christian and you accept God, Christ as your Savior, and you decide to walk a path of obedience and fear, the biblical fear, and then you say, oh, it's all going to be perfect. It's going to be sunshine and bed of roses and sugar and spice. Then you're misleading yourself. And every now and then God needs to rein us in and put a big test on us to say, hey, I want you to know just how strong you are. But in the meantime, I want you to know that I need you to be strong for me as well as each other. This is a beautiful story about Abraham. And, I love the kids know about Noah and Jonah and all these stories that we really uh, put into the children's minds when they're small. But Abraham and Isaac is just as important, even though it's graphic in its nature. It's just as important because these little boys that you're talking to and these little girls are going to be adults. They're going to be parents. They're going to be school teachers and friends, and understand that they're going to be tested. They may not ever be tested the way Abraham was, but they're going to be tested. And we have to have that commitment to God and a relationship to Him where we should be fearful of losing that. And that's what Abraham did not want to lose. He did not want to lose his relationship with God. And he passed the test, and then God provided. And then when we see the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and how that played out, we can all go back to the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Old Testament. It's kind of just a preview of things to come. So, any comments? Any questions, concerns, or? Hmm. Yeah, he did. Yeah, and he could have made a left or right turn, or hid in the cave, or he had a lot of opportunity to be disobedient, but the fear of losing that relationship kept him on his path, or as teachers would say, on task. I hear that term a lot. Um, what do you think was in Abraham's mind when the angel of the Lord came to him and said, "Don't hurt that child"? Confusion, relief. Yeah, he's like, "Oh, whew." But do you think he's like, "Well, what now? I've got to do something. I've been asked to do this, but I've went through all these steps. What now?" It's not his place to ask. God provided. God said, "I will provide." And he gave him a ram. And I'm sure that the ram he saw caught in the thicket was probably the most impressive, most beautiful, most perfect, most flawless ram he ever saw his whole life. And he knew right away, just simply by the physical presentation of the ram, that this is what was supposed to happen. But it wasn't a matter of Abraham testing to see how far he would go, or God testing Abraham to see how far he would go, so God would know. He did this so Abraham would know what he's prepared to do to keep that relationship with God. So the what I want us to take away from this lesson tonight is ask yourself, what are you prepared to do when you're tested and your relationship with God is tested, or your relationship with your spouse or your friends or your family or whatever. When you're tested, how far are you willing to go to show your relationship with God and the kindness that He's placed in our heart? Yeah, yeah, it does. And I think that, mhm, I think Abraham and God were already as close as a man and the Creator can be. God knew it, but Abraham, being a human, was not perfect and had doubts and fears and all these things. But I think God wanted to prove to Abraham how close they truly were, because I think maybe Abraham probably had some doubts where God didn't, and so he had to prove to Abraham in his own way, saying, "Hey, you're right here with me, and this proves it. I already knew, but you needed to know." And sometimes we doubt ourselves. It's a different concept, a way of looking at it. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. I never thought about that angle. That's a really good way to look at it. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good insight. It's a really good insight, and you can see that ritualistic. The Incas, I think, did a lot of that, and yeah, and our God is forgiving and loving, and and He was commanding Abraham to do the last thing that Abraham ever thought he would ask, and but Abraham was willing to not separate himself from God. So yeah, 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 and that really hits home too when God went ahead and proceeded on with what He asked Abraham to do, and the sacrifice of God and His Son saved mankind. But the act that Abraham was going to do was just going to be a display of obedience and solidifying the relationship there, which was already. Yeah, yeah. Any questions? Any, I love the story, and you get a chance to read it, and every time you read it, you'll see a little different angle on it. But I like that what Danny brought up. That's a pretty good way to look at that. I like that. So, but our God is the only true God. There's no other gods before Him, and no other God exists. So, any questions? Okay. Well, real quick, before we close, 35 minutes. Um, Irene is doing, or Irene, Lorraine is doing better today. She was able to get up and walk this morning. She was asked if she could go to needed to go to the bathroom, and she said yes, please. So they helped her up, and she went to the restroom and had a swallow test this morning, and is able to swallow and drink and eat normal food within limits. She hadn't had her when I was there. She hadn't had her regular medication for a couple of days because Herb couldn't get her to take it. So that they believe that was causing a lot of the problems. But as of this morning, she was, as they say, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and she's still struggling with some other issues from her disease, but she's a lot better off than she was yesterday morning. And so I sat there and I told Herb, I said, I can't leave in this current situation. I can't leave because I was just visiting him, and he said, well, what do you think we need to do? She needs to go to the hospital.